and welcome back. You've just tuned into Women's AM. This morning I am joined by Sister Nusrat, Sister Hannah and Sister Tahira Shuli. Sisters, welcome back. And Sister Tahira, mashallah, you are the founder of the Olive Tree Support to Kids. Tell us a little bit about how you came about, setting it up. What was the idea behind it?
It started when my daughter was around 2 and I had to look for I think 2 to 3 she was, where she started to talk, and I wanted to look for an Islamic school for her. And I actually couldn't find anything that she was used to learning in nursery through having fun. And most of these madrasas, the moment I stepped in, it just brought back my flashbacks of my own memory of how we learned Quran, and we know that wasn't very positive. And that's where my journey really began, where I thought I want to be my primary teacher for my children. So this is it's really relevant to today's topic of seeking knowledge. So I started with the intention of learning tajweed myself, and then I wanted to teach my children. So it really started there, and alhamdulillah, I went through the whole journey of attaining my ijazah. And then some neighbours heard me teaching my daughter, so they said, oh, can you teach our children, and so on. So I started off with about 2 to 3 students, and suddenly, within a couple of weeks, the news spread, there's a female teacher, she's really good. Then I had about 10 children, and I thought my dining room table can't take any more, Oh. And then that's where the whole inspiration came, that if I can benefit 10 children, what if I can benefit, in the tens and hundreds of students? So, alhamdulillah, it really began there, and then I had to find a suitable place, and mashallah, we were blessed with a really massive garden, like humongous, and I thought I need to build a structure or something there that I can start. And that's where it really started. I invested in, I didn't have a penny to my name, alhamdulillah, but I found investment with my husband, and then we bought a porter cabin, and we made it into a classroom setting, put whiteboards, made it all colourful, and now, mashallah, I would say we've got about 550 students, 3 branches. So alhamdulillah, it's just growing.
You see, it was with the right intention, and Allah, opened the door for you. Alhamdulillah, yeah. Mashallah, that's really beautiful. Inshallah, we'll be looking to get some tips from you on the topic now, inshallah. Well, without further ado, let's get on with today's discussion in her views. As Muslims, we know that seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every believer, and it yields great reward. Abu Hurairah relates that the Prophet ﷺ said, "For him who embarks on the path of seeking knowledge, Allah will ease for him the way to paradise." But what does it mean to seek knowledge, and how can we increase our understanding of the deen in the busyness of our day-to-day lives? Well, remember, as always, this is a live discussion, so please do share your comments and questions on this topic. The number to call is on your screens now, or you can tweet us at Islam Channel, #WAM15. So, Sister Tahira, I'm going to come to you first. Why is it important for us to increase our knowledge? Because we hear this a lot, you've got to increase your knowledge. Why must we do this?
First and foremost, we know it's a commandment from Allah, and everyone knows that the first word that was revealed in the Quran is Iqra. And some scholars say it's to seek knowledge, others say it's to read. Allah could have commanded us to pray. That could have been the first commandment, or give zakat, but it was a seeking knowledge, because without the knowledge you wouldn't know what are the correct actions. And also to associate seeking pleasure to Allah's commandments. So when we pray, we don't just pray because we have to, but rather we pray because we want to gain closer to Allah and we want to seek His pleasure. So likewise with seeking knowledge, it should be to gain the pleasure of Allah, to gain closer to Him, understand how He wants to be worshipped and in what way. Another really, important factor is that whatever knowledge that you're seeking, that it makes you a better person than you were before you acquired that knowledge. So one example is, say, for example, understanding Surah Fatiha and knowing its tafsir, because we read Surah Fatiha so many times in one salah, most probably about 4 to 5 times, and we just whizzed through it. So one day I made the conscious effort and said, no, I want to read the tafsir of Surah Fatiha. So I picked up Tafsir ibn Kathir, and at the end of it, subhanallah, now when I'm reading Fatiha, I know what it means, and the whole idea that Allah, you're having a conversation with Allah, so after every verse you take a second pause, and then you do the second verse. So the idea is that knowledge that you've seeked, that it makes a change in your life and makes you a better person, and it brings about that result.
I think you're right there. You can see the change in your life. It has to have that impact, because it's no good just reading something if it's not actually doing anything to better you. So subhanallah, that's a really good message. But also, Hannah, when we look at the importance of seeking knowledge, we find in the Quran many verses which actually reinforces that Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Ilm is actually mentioned 779 times in the Quran. It's the most common word after Allah. And if we are actually going to embrace, this deen and be, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave this as a light to our lives, if we're going to truly embody that, we need to know it first and foremost. And as you said, there's so many hadith and ayat relating to this. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. Of the 4 obligatory matters in Imam Ibn Abdul Wahhab's a booklet that he's done called Usul al-Thalatha, the 3 fundamental principles of essentially, Tawheed and getting closer and knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first one is knowledge. And he actually divides it into 3 things: in knowledge of Allah, knowledge of the Rasul, and knowledge of the Deen. And these are the 3 things that we're going to be asked in our grave by the angel. And subhanAllah, this is the purpose of our life, that we, inshallah, will be able to answer those questions correctly. So we need to make sure that while we're alive, we're doing as much as we can to increase our knowledge in regards to that. In Islam as well, whilst we're not required to know the proofs for absolutely everything, we have to know the proofs for the actions which are fard for us to act upon. And also something that I think is really beautiful is that in Islam you can never have enough knowledge. I was at an interfaith event recently, and somebody asked, it was a non-Muslim, they said, where do you get your knowledge from? And we actually me and the other sisters on the panel, we had to explain that, learning is a lifelong process. And you can never be no one can ever turn around and say, oh, I have enough knowledge. No shuyukh, no scholar will ever say that. But often in other religions, people who have some religious knowledge, they're very much looked up to as someone who's an authority on the subject, whereas knowledge should make us more humble. And I think that that is something beautiful, that whilst we learn, there's never a point where we can stop and say that's enough. And I think that's just something really beautiful about the way that Islam has looked upon that. That is something unique to our deen specifically.
I think that's a really beautiful point that you made there, is that, we never have enough. We've never learned enough, and we never know enough. And I think it comes back, I don't remember which one of the 4 great imams who have said this, but they said that, in seeking knowledge, I have learned that I do not know enough. So I think it's one of those things where, the more you learn, the more humble you become in the fact that you understand how tiny your knowledge is, despite, all the time that you've put into it, all the research that you've put into it, that actually at the end of the day, there's so much more than just what you've learned. So subhanAllah, it kind of reinforces that, your status within this life is that you are this much, if that, subhanAllah. And another point that you made, I really liked, Hannah, was the fact that, we're preparing for this test, for, the akhirah, and the one before that is even the test in our grave. And it kind of comes back to an analogy I always say, which is kind of cheesy, which is basically, this life is basically the exam room, so everything that we do, everything that we're doing is going to lead up to how we do it later on, whether we succeed or not. But when it comes to, knowledge and the seeking of knowledge, does this mean that we kind of have to limit what we do in terms of the secular knowledge out there? Does it mean that we have to, is there a limit? Is there a, what do we have to do in, Nusrat, to make sure that we're not actually losing that balance that we should have?
I think people kind of have this kind of view that if you're seeking secular knowledge or religious knowledge, whatever, that they can't be, they have to be mutually exclusive, and that's kind of the issue when we look at things in these kind of binaries, because falling into either extreme is actually quite dangerous for us. You can still pursue secular knowledge. An example would be, for example, within the Golden Age, our Muslim inventors, many of them were good at, for example, maths, sciences, astronomy, physics, whatever, even within literary arts. But the point to make is that you're using Islam as a base for which you could use, through your knowledge of whatever I've just mentioned, like maths or whatever, to use Islam as a way of propelling you to meet a need. So, for example, you can be great at maths. You can study further maths, pure maths, until, to your heart's content, even past PhD level if you want to. But if you're using it in a way that is to help benefit not only just yourself, but those around you. So, for example, the people that made those kind of compasses that we use for Qibla, they know that people like to calculate distances and points which we all benefit today, not just us as Muslims, but the wider society. So in that sense, you shouldn't recline from seeking knowledge in that sense, but the importance is your intention and using Islam as a base for that. And I think that the person that explains it best for me, when I listened to a talk recently, was by Timothy Winter, the fully integrated life, where he says, if you're looking to gain a top mark in something, you have to go back to your intent. Why is it for? Is it to please Allah? Is it to help yourself in some way? So it goes back to the intent. However, when you are studying religious knowledge, you have to be careful that you're not just solely limiting your realms to that. So the only issue that you would have when people seek either knowledge solely and not balancing the two, because you need to have a balance. You need to have a balance of, I'm going to allot this time to learning, say, my tajweed, to learning my Arabic alphabet, to learning fiqh of this. You have to have an allotted time, and Al-Ghazali talks about time management. If you're only pushing for one type of knowledge, you're only limiting yourself to one realm. The problem with limiting yourself to only pursuing secular studies is that you're going to not have the proper tools to help navigate you, because Islamically, even religiously, once you learn the rules of Allah, you're able to navigate yourself through any problems that you may face. But even in terms of earning your rizq, is this halal or haram? How will this help provide for my family? And so if you don't have that knowledge, it's not going to help you in life, even in the afterlife. If you only limit yourself to religious knowledge, you're not being fine-tuned to the world around you, which is not always, particularly in the society we live in, which is not based on the premise of religion. And if you're only limiting yourself to religious knowledge, you sometimes may not be able to relate to some people who aren't religious. So again, taking the balance here is what's needed.
And subhanAllah, what you've reiterated here is balance. And we know that, you know, mashallah, that our deen is the deen of the middle path, which is having that balance. I think, Sister Tahira, as a teacher, when you've got your students coming in, you know, how do you manage this to have this balance as well? Because obviously you teach tajweed and you teach Quran to children, but how do you manage to keep that balance? Because it might be tough for some of these kids to get into that sort of frame of mind, isn't it, to kind of take in this
I think what's really important is seeking knowledge. It depends on individuals and their circumstances as well. Where when I had my first daughter, me and my husband, we went to something called the Rihla. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. Which is initially when we did it, it was in New Mexico, and over the past few years they've been doing it in Turkey, and it's literally a whole month that's dedicated to deen intense learning. And I did that with my daughter, and she was a little angel. She'll just sit in the dars with me, and mashallah, all the shuyukh, they touched her head and made dua for her and so on. But right now, for me to imagine to go down that journey again, you know, it will stress me out, just the thought, because I have now 4 children, mashallah. So the thing is, it's to do with your certain circumstance and your limitations. Sometimes you have students that they've just left school and they decide to do a full-time alima course, whereas someone else might be pursuing a career in medicine or, say, teaching, so they might do a part-time alima course. What's really important is, regardless of your situation, like you said, it's about having that balance and looking at your life and thinking, how much can I dedicate to seeking knowledge, you know? And that could be as little as 15 minutes a day that you put to aside and say, look, this is my time to, you know, listen to a YouTube clip on, say, purification of the soul, or to read a certain book. Or it could be 1 hour in a week. It will really depend on everyone's circumstances.
I think that's one of the things. I think sometimes we want to do a lot. You know, we have these lists of things that we want to accomplish. Sometimes we don't help ourselves because it isn't realistic. It's not taking into account our situation. I think sometimes you have to sit back and think, okay, honestly, you know, what can I do with the time that I have? And then kind of go from there, inshallah.
Sometimes it's very common that you hear...
we'll go back to this, inshallah, once we come back from breaks. So sorry for interrupting you. We have to pause the discussion to go for a quick break, but don't go anywhere, because when we return, we'll be continuing on this topic. But before we go, take a look at this week's competition. Alaikum and welcome back to Women's AM. This morning I am joined by Sister Nusrat, Sister Hannah and Sister Tahira to continue our discussion on how to acquire knowledge of the Deen. Don't remember, if you have anything to share on this topic, please do call in. The number is on your screen now, or you can tweet us at Islam Channel, #WAM15. So kind of continuing on with what we've been talking about. Mashallah, we talk about, you know, the fact that we have notable figures within our history who are a great example to us in what it means to actually strive in gaining knowledge. So what examples can you give us, Sister Hannah, of the numerous, mashallah, people that we've got?
There are loads. I mean, first thing is that I think a lot of these reflect an attitude, so it's not necessarily something we have to copy, you know, to the letter, but it's just a general attitude towards learning that people of previous generations had. So it was common for the Sahaba, such as a couple of names I've got here, Sa'id ibn Musayyib and Asad ibn al-Furat, to travel really far distances to seek knowledge, you know, subhanAllah, different countries, different cities, and this is in an era when travel is not easy, you know, it takes months for people to travel, and they used to sometimes do it merely for the sake of one hadith, you know, just to authenticate one hadith. And that kind of dedication is just, it's completely awe-inspiring. Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, he was a high-ranking student of Abu Hanifa, and subhanAllah, he barely used to sleep, you know, and whenever he was up in the night and he was studying, if he used to get tired, he used to have a bucket of ice next to him, and he used to wipe his face with that water in order to like wake him up and keep himself up. Even Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, who we know from, you know, his infamous hadith collection, he used to go to sleep, but then just as he was falling asleep, he'd remember something in his notes that he'd have to jot down. And subhanAllah, he used to get up to 20 times in one night. As he was falling asleep, he'd remember something and he'd have to write it down. This kind of dedication, you know, it's unheard of. And even if they didn't live very long, they achieved more than, subhanAllah, like, you know, hundreds of times more than many people, than other people do. I mean, an example is Imam Nawawi, and he died when he was 44, so very young, subhanAllah, and he only started writing in his 30s. Yet there are so many books and hadith collections and commentaries attributed to him. You know, it's just really, really awe-inspiring. And I think these examples are a lesson in humility for all of us, because in such an age of comfort, we can find it very difficult to just even, you know, put on a talk listening while we're doing something else, you know, or when we do, we kind of like, oh yes, mashallah, alhamdulillah, we did it. And, you know, we should definitely try and do these things, but I think, again, it's about that mindset. And often when, you know, I've helped organise some events or different Islamic events, something you always hear brothers and sisters say is, oh, bring food because then people will come. and that's always something that when you read these examples, it's like, subhanAllah, we've got to a level as an ummah where, you know, we need other things to attract us to seek knowledge, because we haven't got that dedication within us, from within ourselves. And so whilst we don't need to copy these examples and, you know, travel really, really far just for the sake of one hadith, we need to just embody that spirit and that attitude towards learning and its significance.
Can I bring in another point? From another angle is how people or the ummah used to treat those that were seekers of knowledge as well. It's amazing, you know, you hear how they'd offer them food and place to stay, and as soon as they knew someone's on a path of journey. And that culture and feeling and atmosphere is still very much alive in the Muslim countries, because we have a lot of Westerners that go from here and, you know, go abroad to study. Myself, when I went to do my ijazah in Syria, I had to leave my children behind. It was a 10-day examination that I went for. And, you know, when we would go, straight away they would know this was in Syria, so they would know that you're here for, you know, really only to seek knowledge. It was a very popular thing. And, you know, they'd offer us free food and, you know, give us discounts at the market store, because they knew that, especially when they hear that I left my children behind, and, you know, the way they treat you is really awesome as well. And we don't kind of get this atmosphere here, you know, but it's still very much alive in the Middle East and the Muslim countries.
I think, mashallah, it's both of these things, mashallah, is having that attitude within ourselves to want to seek that knowledge for the sake of Allah, and also the fact that, you know, people make it easier for you when you are on that path as well. I think, you know, when we live in the times that we live in today, even though things, mashallah, are much easier, you know, we've got the internet, we've got, you know, libraries that we can go to and get vast amounts of research done, we still find it that people aren't so very forthcoming when it comes to actually just giving you a hand, whether it's kind of like helping you juggle your schedule a little bit better, things like that. And it's not to say that they have to, but it's just that sort of that niceness, that attitude of trying to help someone along that journey. It's kind of been lost, hasn't it, over time? But, you know, when we look at the methods of learning, there are so many ways that we can go about it. But what are some of the best methods of learning that we can actually implement, Nusrat?
I think in terms of the best learning methods, there's no the one. So let me just demystify that. It depends largely on what you're studying. So, for example, if you are studying Arabic language, you're looking at the reading, the writing, the speaking. How are you going to use that? Sometimes for some people, if it's writing, you may want to colour coordinate your notes. You may want to draw your alif or your ba in different colours, or make it very visual, because some people are visual learners. And then if you want to practice the writing and the speaking of it, do it daily and allot a certain time, saying, I'm going to maybe write a sentence. That sentence then leads on to 2, to 3. So I think the essence here is the best method of learning depends on the individual and their learning style, but then supplementing that with practice. I also find that when we talk about learning methods, that sometimes it does not have to just pertain just to an actual style of learning, but even the approach and outlook. So when you are in front front of the teacher, the muallim, this often gets overlooked. When you are learning from him or her, you are essentially being engulfed in their fountain of knowledge. This is where being quiet and not incessantly interrupting also comes in handy because, and yeah, it's true, some people can immediately just come in and swagger in just to interrupt the teacher or just, ask deliberately contentious questions when they've not even mastered the basics. And I think this is important. They're essentially, as Imam al-Zarnuji said, you're essentially, your person that teaches you a letter of the religion is your mother or father in the religion. So essentially absorb from them. Try to do more listening than actually talking because you could miss it, because by doing that you're able to absorb much more than even intended. And from this, you've also found that learning from other students helps because on a matter, particularly if it's something like maybe like fiqh, for example, learning different viewpoints from your other colleagues in this sense actually helps broaden your mind. And that's something that I found actually helpful because currently I'm doing fiqh or finance actually with one of my teachers. And we have different students from all over the world. And there's only a small class of us. And we kind of learn off each other. We kind of look at things, oh, what about this problem? So talking to your other students as well is a really big thing that I would definitely recommend because you learn from other people. So yeah.
So, I mean, Sister Tahira, mashallah, since you are also a teacher, mashallah, you teach some of the best kind of students, which are children. They're sponges, they absorb everything, but at the same time, so easily distracted. What have you found have been the best methods for you?
To be honest, Olive Tree is, I would say, the only weekend Islamic school that teaches children from the age of 3, because it requires so much effort and energy and creativity to teach children that are under the age of 5 or 6. Most of the Islamic schools you'd see, they start at the age of 6 because it gets much easier then. So we invest in a lot of resources on Play-Doh, sand, and just a lot of creativity to teach the children, alphabets. And something I'm recently working on is creative nasheeds to teach children tajweed rules. So literally they'll be singing the qalqala letters and singing the makhraj, where the places come from, because these are really theoretical. And even as an adult, it's very hard to keep it in your mind. So I thought to myself, nursery rhymes, we still remember Old MacDonald's and Baba Black Sheep, and it's still glued to our head. And I thought, this would be a fascinating way to teach children tajweed from a very young age. If they know the qalqala letters just through singing, inshallah, it's in the process of being launched, hopefully at the end of December. So I'm really excited. So it's just a lot of creativity coming up with, really thinking that you're a child, and what do children like? They love singing, they love playing. So you just take whatever concept that you're teaching, be it tajweed or Quran or even fiqh, salah. You want to teach them how to do salah, do it through actions and
I think that's a really good point. I think sometimes, even as adults, we're very much, if we think about studying, it's always about looking at a text, reading off a page or reading off a screen, and we tend to forget that learning could be so much more. And sometimes that, even that method isn't always the best method, depending on the time of day, depending on the kind of learner that you are, and taking into account, how you enjoy doing things. So I know Nusrat, mashallah, like you said, colour coordinating, and I know I see you all the time with your highlighters, mashallah.
And audiobooks. I've become a big fan of audiobooks now as well, and even my class which takes place, it's by Skype, so it's audio.
So kind of trying to find what works for you. I think a lot of the times it's trial and error, trying to see what works for you, try and remember even your schooling days. What did you enjoy in certain classes? What was it about those classes and things like that, and how you can incorporate some of those things into the way that you learn as well. So kind of looking at the importance of acting on what we learn as well. Why is it that it is important for us to act on these things, Sister Hannah?
Essentially, acting on what you know is the soul of knowledge. There's nothing in the Sharia that indicates that knowing anything that is not acted upon is of any benefit of you. Essentially, it's useless. And a sign of sort of previous generations past, something that often you see in the Quran and the various stories, was that they knew various lessons, but they didn't necessarily act upon it. And again, we know of previous generations when signs of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given to them in their books. Many of them recognized him, but they chose not to act upon it. And this is something that we should, completely and definitely avoid. The knowledgeable person does not only have their body parts testify on Qiyamah against them or for what they used to do. We know that on the Day of Judgment, our hands will tell us, will tell Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what we used to use them for. Our feet will say where they used to take us. But also the hadiths and the ayat that we know will come and testify as to whether they were acted upon. So essentially, with great knowledge comes great responsibility, and we need to make sure that obviously we're putting everything that we know to good use. But this isn't to say that then, you know, oh, I'm going to have so much responsibility if I learn more, I'm going to stay into it. No, absolutely not. You know, we've all talked about how, you know, seeking knowledge is so encouraged and frowned upon us, and it's haram to, consciously be like, I'm not going to pursue this. And according to Ibn al-Jawzi, the ulama, they used to travel to go and see various other scholars, not to just learn from them, but to see how they acted upon their knowledge. So again, we've all talked about, you know, the best methods of learning, and, you know, how you can never learn enough. And I think that acting upon it adds another completely different dimension that, you know, that is, again, just really, really deep.
But I think it's one of those things that we see today, you know, the fact that you see a lot of people who are notable figures within, you know, the communities or in public, and sometimes they don't exactly embody, you know, the image of what a person of knowledge should. And I think it's sometimes it kind of makes you think of, you know, subhanAllah, with all of this knowledge, how has this not transformed the way I behave or how I interact with others? SubhanAllah, it's one of those things like, you know, you check up on yourself as well. Have I changed since learning this? What have I changed? But alhamdulillah, we do have a caller on the line with a comment. Sister Tabassum, assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. I just wanted to sing the praises of the humble whiteboard again, and you know, it's just so useful, not from the local supermarket, but from the actual providers of primary school. The biggest whiteboard you can afford in the kitchen. And if it's a young child, you could just say, you know, draw an apple and say, well, you know, tell me 3 things about it. It could be just it's green, green, heart-shaped and tasty, just to develop a child's personality, verbal ability and confidence, and, you know, to bring up creativity. And with older child, you could put a book on the table, a hadith, and just put number 205, for instance, and it's for them to look up what's the hadith of the day. You know, just to make people a bit more creative. And, you know, yeah, that's it.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Tabassum. I think that's really good. It's incorporating different things to actually, you know, spurn that creativity, to get them to enjoy their lessons, to get them to want to learn more and to feel involved as well, because sometimes we can feel a little bit detached from what we're learning. Sometimes we zone out because it's probably, you know, not the right time and not the right method. So subhanAllah, there are a lot of things that we can do. So thank you, Jazakallah khair, Sister Tabassum, for your points there. And when we, coming back to looking at the importance of acting on the things that we learn, Sister Nusrat, what can you add to that?
You have greater insight and perspective as to the thing. So if you, with each little fact that you know about something, whether it's religious knowledge or not, it makes you more informed to make a more informed decision accordingly. So it gives you greater insight and perspective as to the thing. And it can even serve as a form of motivation as well. So it's important to act on knowledge, because when you have imbibed that knowledge and you teach that to somebody else and you act it, you're actually not only fulfilling something that's expected of you, of which, inshallah, you'll reap the reward of that, but you're also motivating somebody that perhaps wouldn't have been otherwise inspired to have gone to a book and learn to implement that same thing. So essentially, you're picking up rewards as you go along. As well, like Hannah said, there are implications that you'll have of this knowledge in the afterlife. So with each fact that you learn and somebody implementing that, and you implementing it as well, it'll count as a good deed for you on the day of recompense, so on the day of judgment in that sense. Also, in terms of understanding of time, the more knowledge you get, you'll actually begin to have more of an understanding of time and the fact that essentially your days are limited on this earth. You should spend it in acquiring things that are going to be of use to you, whether that's in terms of furthering your worldly affairs or in furthering your affairs in the hereafter. And Al-Ghazali, I think, teaches us about priority in this regard and how essentially your time is your life.
SubhanAllah, I mean, that's a really good reminder. I think sometimes we tend to think, oh, I've got plenty of time, I've got plenty of time. Yeah. You put things off and then you never do it. And then a week passed, months passed, years pass, and you think, subhanAllah, do you know what, I actually never got to do this. And you think, look at the time that I've wasted. And sometimes I look back on my time and I think, no, I could have managed my time better. So I think that's a really important message.
No, on Sister Nusrat's point, there was really famous saying by a really well-known author called Robin Sharma, and he says that with better awareness brings about better awareness brings about a change as well. So when you're aware of something, then you'd see that, because you become conscious of it, then it's only then you can bring about change. So if you're not even aware of a bad habit that you have or a bad etiquette that you have, then you can't bring about that change.
Absolutely. And I think because we've only got a very limited time now, because we're coming to the end, what practical tips can you give to anyone that's watching today in how to increase their knowledge?
I would say definitely look at your whole day, your schedule, and, you know, pre-plan that certain time that you know that you've got to yourself. And for mums, I mean, I'm talking a lot from a mum's point of view, is it could be setting your alarm 15-20 minutes before your children wake up and dedicate that time to develop yourself, your personal development. Or it could be once they've gone to bed. I mean, evening doesn't work well for me because I get so tired, but that's one tip. You know, look at your whole schedule, find that one time that you know that is for you, and you know, you connecting to seeking knowledge, and go for it.
Jazakallah khair for that, sister. So time management and being very aware of the limited time as well. So Jazakallah khair for that. Seeking knowledge is an act of worship that requires us to keep our intentions sincerely for Allah alone and no one else, and seeking His pleasure and reward. It is an act of enormous importance in our deen, which emphasizes learning and implementing in equal measure. By viewing it as a means of getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can structure our learning to best suit our needs. There's been a really informative discussion, but if you've missed any of today's show, you can catch a repeat tonight at 11 p.m, or you can catch up with the highlights from this week on Sunday at 3 p.m, or alternatively, you can catch up with us on YouTube, inshallah. But unfortunately, we have come to the end of today's show. But do join us again tomorrow, where we'll be discussing, inshallah, I've forgotten what we're discussing. Cervical cancer, subhanallah. Yes, a very important topic, so please make sure you tune in. But before we go, here's another reminder of this week's competition.